Welcome to the Emerging Issues Show. I am your host, Donald Kendall. This is the show where we are talking about topics that are popping up on the peripheries of society and public policy. Today, we're going to be diving into what should be a very controversial piece of proposed legislation that could grant governors immense emergency powers over society, circumventing individual liberty in the name of public safety. It seems pretty crazy, but the craziest aspect to all of this is the reason why a lot of people are completely unaware of this proposal. So today's guest is Kendyl Turner, a fellow in the American Journey Experience Freedom Rising Fellowship Program and author of the article "This Bill Would Turn Governors into Tyrants, No Legislature Needed." So, Kendyl, thank you for coming on with me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, let's start off with the basics. The legislation that I'm referring to in the intro of this is called the Public Health Emergency Authority Act. Let's start off with just kind of explaining in general what this PHEAA is to the audience.
Yes, so just as a general overview, the PHEAA, or the Public Health Emergency Authority Act, is basically a model bill, a legislation that hasn't quite been passed yet, that would basically give governors the authority to declare their own public health emergency authority acts within their state. So they can shut down things, they can take things away, similarly to what happened in COVID, but according to their own boundaries, and they can make it up when they want.
Yeah, well, I will say that as I was reading through this article, it's published at The Blaze, I was struck by how far-reaching and how blatantly authoritarian all of this is. And it almost seems, like you mentioned COVID, it almost seems like it's it almost seems like it's already a thing, considering of what we had experienced with COVID. But for this to be codified in this way is shocking to me. But what's more shocking, we'll get into the details of it, but what's more shocking to me is that this isn't like everyone on Fox News is talking about this every day, because this just seems so far-reaching. So can you explain maybe how this is coming about and why we haven't really heard a peep from many people, why it's flying so far under the radar, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, if I were to look up something online about the PHEAA, hardly anything comes up. You have to put in all these keywords and like the organization that created it, the ULC, to be able to have anything come up. And I think that's one of the reasons, is that the ULC, this organization, created it, and it hasn't been passed yet. And so I don't think there's not a lot of information about it yet, just because it's not been brought to people's attention. Even like people in my life around me who are very political have no idea that this is happening. And I think that it's just something that this organization has historically been in charge of other corrupt things. And I think they can easily get under the radar with policymakers in various states. One of the mentors from my internship right now mentioned to me that the ULC is often able to have things go under the radar because of their like buddy friendships with policymakers. So it doesn't get quite, I don't know, as public as it should be.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I am a little familiar with the ULC, the Uniform Law Commission, and historically, they proposed this model legislation across 50 states across the country, and a lot of it historically is stuff that is not controversial. It's making sure that transaction laws are the same in all these different states to facilitate, commerce or whatever, right? It's stuff that will put you to sleep if I had to explain it in more sentences than that. But what we have noticed is that there is some pretty controversial, what should be controversial legislation being pushed by this organization that like I said, seems to fly under the radar. But let's get into some of the details of the Public Health Emergency Authority Act. So again, reading from this article here, it talks about how public health emergency could mean an infectious disease. It could be a chemical spill that might cause, quote unquote, a significant risk or substantial harm to the state's population. I mean, call me cynical, but that feels a little open-ended. What do you think?
100%. All of the parameters within this document are so vague. And if I might, I have written down the paragraph that I got that information from when I wrote the article, pulled directly from that document.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the parameters it gives for what can cause an emergency. And it says an imminent threat or actual appearance of an infectious, biologic, radiologic, or chemical agent or toxin, regardless of cause, that poses a high probability of 1, a large number of deaths in individuals in the affected population, 2, a large number of serious or long-term disabilities of individuals in the affected population, and 3, widespread exposure to the agent or toxin that poses a significant risk of substantial harm to a large number of individuals. And that's just so vague. There's toxins all over. Things can occur to people all the time. There's flus that come in the spring and the fall constantly, but there's no reason to shut down a whole population because of those small things, especially if declared by the governor.
Right. And we know from just kind of the historical debates and conversations around like 2 words in the Constitution, and that justifies these massive wings of the federal government or something like that, that we know that, all of this really boils down to the interpretation of these words. And I feel like the term substantial harm. What does that mean? Does that mean that it affects 10,000 people, 100,000 people, or 2 people? So I just wonder if this legislation is could be so broadly interpreted, especially by, governors or legislators in states that have shown during the COVID emergencies that they are willing to take an immense amount of power and hold on to it, with an iron tight grip. But what is even more shocking to me was this next part of the article that was talking about it allows governors to declare and implement public health emergencies based on, quote, the little information that is then available. So I just heard a rumor that there was some infectious disease, got to declare a public emergency. It would seem, based on the letters of this proposal, that would be totally inside the purview of this legislation.
Totally. That's what they're saying. And I have the paragraph right here. It says, for example, there may be little information about the nature and risks of a novel virus that is spreading and harming all or a part of a state's population. In such a case, this section requires only that the government account for the little information that is then available when assessing whether a public health emergency exists and whether he can shut down something. And how vague is that? It's true. Like you just said, it could be a rumor of something, could be a little, I don't know, right now is flu season. It could be a little thing that's sweeping through a city, and yet we'd have to go back under the parameters of COVID again, which would just be awful.
Especially in this day and age with like the way that the media talks about stuff. I know that, every different variant of COVID in the months and years since the actual like lockdowns and pandemic stuff was talked about like, oh, here it comes again. Version, X25 of COVID is coming, or, monkeypox is popping up again, or, oh, I heard swine flu is coming around again. It's just like any of those things, if it gets significant play in the media, could theoretically be used as justification for the governor to take like an emergency power type control. That is just absolute insanity and should be concerning to anybody that's got a pulse in this country. But what are, though, like, let's elaborate a little bit on the actual controls that would be put into the governor's pocket if something like this were to be declared. Like what could they do under this new authority?
Yes. So like it says in the document, they're given this authority, and they are able to declare an emergency whenever they like or when they see fit, as long as the legislature is in session within like a couple of days. So it's super vague. In fact, they don't even have to be. It could be like a couple days after or before, whenever it is. And so a couple things that would be in their power are directly from the document: testing, isolation, quarantine, movement, gathering, evacuation, relocation of individuals, surveillance, monitoring, assessment of the public health emergency, suspension of a provision or a statute, order, rule, access to security of electronic communication, and the list just goes on. And so not only would they be entering into our own, like, they'd be encroaching very much into our personal lives, but into the education, into every little thing, just as they were doing in COVID. But I would even venture to say even more than COVID.
Yeah, it almost feels like they should just list off the things that they're not
Right.
allowed to do. I
I
mean,
know.
it's just like, how about just replacing that whole section with like they can do whatever they want. As
Totally.
long as they're just claiming that this is for the general public good, they can do whatever they want, because that
Those were
seems
only
to
4
be
points. There's 16 in the points. So that could be it's even worse.
yeah, no kidding. And then another thing, well, I mean, come on, there's got to be a time limit though, right? Like, so they declare this and then that starts a clock. And then once that clock is over, they have to give up power, right?
Right.
Please tell
I
me that
wish.
that's the case.
No, so they can they can extend this or renew it as long as they need. Again, with that parameter is as long as the legislation is in session within a couple of days or a couple of days after, whatever that rule is. But yeah, they can renew it. There's a direct quote that says like until they see fit or something like that. And it's just disgusting how much power they have.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm looking at some of this, I'm reading from your article, the bill would let governors seize resources and property. I know you said some of this already, but I think
Yeah,
we could probably repeat it 12 times here.
right.
Governors seize resources and property, restrict individuals' movement, and cull animal populations, among other plainly authoritarian measures. I mean, did we not learn anything from COVID? Like, did we not learn anything from human history? Like, this just seems like too much power to
Yeah,
put in an unconstrained way at the top of the ladder over here. I mean, this just seems so crazy.
I know. It doesn't make sense. I am very passionate about like the great books and education and things like that. And just as I've read, like I recently for an assignment had to read about Athens and the giant plague that entered into their city.
Mm.
They use that as a time to develop immunity. They took up those things and they had parameters in place though to make sure their government didn't overcome them, didn't encroach upon those people. But we are willingly, if we don't have any things in place to prevent this model bill from being in every state, giving all of our power, everything to the government. So we are way valuing security over the liberty that we have.
Mhm. So what I mean, this seems, you said right off the top this isn't passed yet. It's just being proposed as model legislation. But what can we do to stop it? Because it feels like some of these things from the ULC just get rubber stamped. Like, yeah, we know these guys, they have boring legislation. Yeah, just go over here, sign it, whatever. But what could be done to limit this or stop it completely?
That's a good question because yes, it hasn't been passed yet, and the ULC is often buddy buddies with policymakers, so they'll just stamp things to approve them because they come from them. But I think the best thing we can do is be informed, so people can read through this document and pick out those things that would just be awful to have in your state. And I don't think that anyone reading this would not want to have COVID again, much less have it be elevated, be way worse. And so I think the best thing would be for people to research the ULC, research their work, what kinds of things they get passed, and then especially this bill, look into it. Don't just simply, vote for it or approve it, accept it if it is passed, and fight back on that. So
Yeah, no doubt. I'm a huge proponent of just kind of getting the message out there to the general public. I feel like a lot of what happens in state legislators specifically, or just government in general, is all caused by or pushed by constituent mandate. So if there is a widespread knowledge and concern about stuff like this, that flows downstream and encourages legislators to take these things seriously and do something about it. But yeah, very, very impressive article, very interesting topic. Is there any other things that I neglected to bring up that you think is important before we wrap up this conversation?
I think you covered most of it. It's pretty simple. It would just be COVID, all over again whenever the governor wants, which just sounds awful to me. So yeah, I think the best thing we can do is just stay informed, have people read this document and realize that it would be awful if it were implemented. So thank
All right. Fantastic. Well, Kendyl Turner, you are a fellow at the American Journey Experience Freedom Rising Fellowship Program and author of the article, this bill would turn governors into tyrants. No legislature needed. I want to thank you for coming on the show with me and talking about this very important topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning into this episode, and catch on the next one. Bye-bye.